Hello, my name is Rain and welcome to my channel where I discuss Fantasy Formula 1. In today's video, we're going to discuss my final thoughts for F1 Fantasy heading into Azerbaijan's Grand Prix. But before that, I want to say a couple of things. First of all, if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, make sure you do so. You can always unsubscribe later if you no longer wish to see my video in your feed. It helps out a ton and I'm trying to hit 5k by the end of the season. Second of all, like the video. That always helps out as well. Third of all, the schedule for the rest of the week is as follows. On Friday, I will once again do a FP1 and FP2 watch-along over on Twitch. My Twitch channel is linked down below in the description. So if you want to watch FP1 and FP2 with me or just have it on in the background while you do something else at work, feel free to join me for that. I will be discussing more things that pertain to F1 Fantasy as well as doing some intermediate gaming between the sessions. So definitely make sure to join me for that if you're interested. Then on Saturday, we will, of course, have a deadline stream 2 hours before the deadline, 2 hours before qualification start, 2 hours before qualifying starts. And then next week, we'll be back with team selections and stuff like that for Singapore. But without further ado, let's head into talking about what my final thoughts are for the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. So before seeing practice, there isn't that much that has changed for my initial plans at the start of last week. At the end of Monza. One thing that we do have to talk about is Charles Leclerc, or specifically maybe Ferrari, and that's because Ferrari had the highest top speed in Monza, and they finally put themselves back as firmly the second best constructor on the grid. No more of that wishy-washy. Is Aston Martin going to be there? Is Williams going to be there? Ferrari was clearly ahead as the second best, and this obviously makes it difficult for me, who's not on a Ferrari-based strategy. I think the best team for Azerbaijan's Grand Prix is going to be the same thing that I said last week. It's a very, very expensive team to afford. So if you can afford this, I think you should look towards it. But I do still think that having good, cheap assets is better than sort of squeezing this lineup in. And that lineup is, of course, the 4A lineup with Leclerc, Piastri, McLaren, and Ferrari. I think that lineup is going to be the best. The problem for me, though, is that I would be willing to take a -10 to get to this team now, but I'm 0.2 million away from affording it. And heading into the weekend, I mean, one more decision, one more budget rise, budget increase that would have gone my way over the course of the season would have led me to be able to afford this. And I definitely think, pre-practice, it's the team I would have gone with. I would have taken a -10 to afford this. But I can't, right? And I would be okay with having a Pierre Gasly in here for 4.5 million. I am not as excited about taking a -20 to sell Hadjar for like a Carlos Sainz or a Liam Lawson and afford it that way. I could afford this, but is it worth a -20? I don't think so. If you have a wild card and I can afford this, I think it's okay to go without Isaac Hadjar. I'm not saying you have to have Hadjar. But at -20, I don't actually think this is going to be worth it over the team that I was in, especially if McLaren end up 1-2ing once again. So if you're in my boat and you're on that triple McLaren lineup, let's go back to it real quick. I think it kind of leaves you with two options. You can either stick with this for this race and go without Ferrari once again. It worked out for me in Monza by 2 points, massively helped by the Norris 2X. Will it work out again? I'm not so sure I can stretch my luck that far. But the two options I'm left with, since I cannot get to the team I want, and I'm probably going to have to go to the 4A lineup, the Leclerc, Piastri, McLaren, Ferrari lineup in Singapore, which is also fine. I think that team is going to be really good in Singapore as well. It's just unfortunate I can't get to it here. And the two option that, this situation leaves me in is once again to either remove Fernando Alonso for any driver that I think is going to increase in price or not drop. Meaning I could get Pierre Gasly in here, or I could go for one driver that I think is going to increase, such as an Oliver Bearman. All right? That's option one. You roll a transfer. That leaves me with 3 transfers in Singapore, and I'm going to be guaranteed to be able to get to a 4A lineup. And if price rises go my way, then I'm going to be able to get to the 4A lineup that I want. The other option is to essentially bite the bullet on the 4A, but to move to Ferrari. And how I would do this is to go for Alex Albon, right? I would remove Lando Norris because I need Piastri next week when I go for the 4A in Singapore. Alex Albon looks really good. It's like a 10-pointer banked unless he DNFs and looks decent for price rise as well. and I get Ferrari in. There's a lot of money in the bank. I don't have final fix or anything like that. 2 transfers. And then when we get to Singapore, I will have 2 transfers again. Alonso will have dropped in price, very likely. But with Albon increasing, hopefully it would be enough to go for Charles Leclerc here and have enough to get Pierre Gasly in there. In terms of which one of those 2 I prefer, I do actually prefer this team slightly, just because it feels safer. I kind of need Norris to beat out Piastri by a decent chunk of points if I have him on the 2x, and I need Williams to perform well. So I do like this team for safety in terms of this weekend alone. But because that only leaves me with 2 transfers in Singapore, Alonso drops in price, and then Albon has a stinker, maybe he drops in price as well, then suddenly I'm priced out of affording what I want to afford, and then I can't get to Piastri Leclerc in Singapore either without having to take a -10 and remove Hadjar again. So while I do slightly prefer this team, which again is super cheap, so most of you can probably afford this, I prefer this team for this weekend alone, just because it, you know, brings in that slight uncertainty about being able to afford the 4A that I want in Singapore. I think I'm still leaning towards what I discussed in my team selection video last week, which is to just sell Alonso for a driver that I think is going to increase in price, that being Ole Behrman, or going for something like a Pierre Gasly who can't drop in price. I've also gotten some questions about the validity of Mercedes within that 4A lineup, and I kind of don't really see it. If you're going for a 4A lineup and you go for the Constructor, I think you kind of have to pick Ferrari just because Kimi Antonelli is not performing right now. Going for Russell up here is okay compared to Leclerc or Hamilton, but obviously they're you know, in price they are much closer to each other than Mercedes Ferrari is. I mean, Leclerc is 23.3, whereas Russell is 22.6. So it gives me enough to afford a Pierre Gasly in here, but I don't know if this combination is worth a -10 in my book. If you can afford this with free transfers, then I think it's worth it, right? But again, with a -10, I'm not so sure I want to take that risk when I know that having Norris in here as a 2xer seems better, and I keep the value increase of the Williams Constructor to be able to afford the Leclerc version, the Leclerc variation in future weekends. And I'm not just saying that because it's a vibe. I'm saying that based on data. These are the last 6 races we've had on the calendar. And I mean, obviously McLaren is outperforming everyone by an absolute mile, but Mercedes really underperforming during this period compared to Ferrari, right? Mercedes has only outscored Ferrari in 2 of the last 6 races, and in Hungary it was, you know, pretty close still. It was about a 15-point swing, and in Zandvoort, Ferrari had a double DNF, so I don't really count that as data. You know, Mercedes had a 30-pointer there as well, which is not good. You kind of need Mercedes to score like 54 points. This is a sprint weekend, so I should probably even remove this from the calendar because, you know, we're going to single sprint weekends now. We're going to single race weekends right now, and that's sort of where our eyes are at. So in the last 5 non-sprint weekends, Mercedes has only cracked the 50-point mark once, whereas Ferrari has hit it 3 times. Whereas Ferrari has hit it twice, but have been much closer on the 2 other occasions when they finished. I don't think the Mercedes variation is worth it for lower budgets. I think it's better in that case to run the sort of lineup where I showed you, where you have Piastri, Albon, plus good, cheap drivers with McLaren and Ferrari. So yeah, that's going to be it for this video. It's a bit of a shorter one, but that's because so far, over this week and a half, nothing has really changed about my plans, right? I did have that additional plan of maybe taking a -10. Can I take a -20? I really want to get Ferrari in there. I think that is the best team for this weekend. It's just not the best team for me with the circumstances that I'm in. Obviously, that goes back to 2 weeks ago when I made the switch to this, but I think it's so far been a success, and I feel like by doing this, I set up for more success in Singapore, right? So hopefully, I'm expecting... I'm not hopefully, but I am expecting a red arrow this week. I'm just hopeful that it's not going to be too massive and that I can claw it back when, you know, playing my chips and running the 4A lineup from Singapore onwards. So that's going to be it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you on Friday on Twitch for the FP1 and FP2 watch along, and for the deadline stream after FP3 on Saturday here on YouTube as well as on Twitch. Thank you so much for watching. Like the video and subscribe. I'll see you all later. Thank you. Bye.